Hello, everyone. My name is Kelly Munn, and I'm with the League of Education Voters. Welcome again to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime LEVinars. We started this series over 3 years ago, probably closer to 4 years now, to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today, you will hear from Julia Warth, LEV's Assistant Director of Policy and Government Relations. Julia is going to give an overview of 2017's accomplishments and outline the possibilities in 2018 around K-12 funding, early childhood education, expanded learning opportunities, student supports, career-connected learning, post-secondary sports, and we'll answer your questions on top of all of that. I'm going to give you a bit of background on Julia before we begin. Julia joined the League of Education Voters in 2015. Prior to joining LEV, she worked as a senior research analyst for the Washington State Board of Education, helped launch the Washington State Charter Schools Association, and worked in public policy consulting. And I'm going to add to this, she also was an intern at LEV before she came and worked here. Julia is committed to helping create a school system in which every student has access to an education that prepares and empowers. Julia received her bachelor's in literature and government from Claremont McKenna College in Southern California and returned home to Seattle for her master's in education from the University of Washington. When she's not in the office, Julia enjoys playing in the mountains and spending time with her family, and we can't forget playing with her dog, Gus. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a chat function on the right side, bottom side of your screen. It's on the bottom, correct?
Well, yeah, it's a Q&A.
Q&A. This is a space for you to pose questions to us. We're using a different system, so I have to move things around. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function or the Q&A function, or you can email us at info@educationvoters.org. At that, I'd like to welcome Julia.
Thank you so much, Kelly. So as Kelly said in the introduction, we are going to be covering developments in education policy in 2017, as well as looking ahead to the 2018 session. There we go. All right. So a couple of major policy shifts in the 2017 session. We had House Bill 2242, which redesigned aspects of our K-12 funding system, as well as House Bill 2224, careful with the bill numbers there, that modified some of our high school assessment structure. There were also developments in discipline rules implementing a bill from the 2016 session. And in the interim, between the 2017 and 2018 session, we had a special election in the 45th Legislative District race, which we'll discuss, and some subsequent changes in Senate committees. So, major policy changes. Oh, we need to go back. No, back. There we go. Great. So House Bill 2242 redesigned our K-12 funding system, and so it modified a number of things, including how staff salary is allocated to districts, the local levy structure, how much districts can raise via local levy, as well as what those local dollars can be spent on. It also introduced a regionalization factor into our funding formula, and made other changes, including the creation of a high poverty concentration factor for schools with over 50% of students enrolled in free and reduced price lunch. House Bill 2224, which modified our high school assessment structure, moved the high school assessment, which is currently the Smarter Balanced Assessment, from 11th grade to 10th grade. And it also altered the alternatives that are available for students who do not meet standard on the test. So students who do not meet standard on the test will no longer have the collection of evidence that was previously an alternative, but there will now be a locally determined course that students may take. The bill also made some changes to the high school and beyond plan, which has previously been a graduation requirement. It is still a graduation requirement, and now districts are required to start the high school and beyond plan process for students in middle school, whereas previously there was no requirement for when the plan would start. And then in terms of discipline rules, so House Bill 1541 was passed in the 2016 session. It made a number of changes to our state student discipline laws, and OSPI has been working on rules to implement those changes. They include changes to things, to behaviors that students may be suspended or expelled for. The House Bill 1541 limited what students could be suspended or expelled for to things that are not discretionary offenses. And the rules will also address the requirement for districts to provide educational services to students, as well as the inclusion of parents in the discipline hearing process and re-engagement planning process. Those rules went through a public comment period in the fall. OSPI is currently working on revisions, and there will either be a second public comment period or a finalization in the coming months. All right. Moving on to our new legislature. So the election of Mankadingra in the 45th district gave the Democrats the majority in the Senate. So we now have a Democratic majority Senate and House, as well as the governor. So this meant that Senate committees were changed around, and we have new chairs for for all committees, rather. Of particular note is that Senator Rolfes is now the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and Senator Wellman is the chair of the Early Learning and K-12 Committee. Another change to the Early Learning and K-12 Committee is that Senator Fain is no longer on that committee, and he has been replaced by Senator Hawkins. All right, so looking ahead to 2018. So 2018 is a short session, and it is a non-budget year, so there will be a supplemental budget. So we are hoping that we get out on time. Fingers crossed. What you see on the slide here is LEV's legislative priorities. So we'll go through our legislative priorities first and then discuss some other items that are likely to come up during the session as well. So we have priorities in 6 areas here. We have priorities in early childhood education, K-12 funding, expanded learning opportunities, student supports, career-connected learning, and post-secondary success. So, you know, just a pretty small list, not much to work on. Go ahead. All right, so in early childhood education, we are prioritizing increasing access to high-quality programming. So for us, that means increasing the slots, so the number of students that can be served by the ECAP program. ECAP is the Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program, as well as the funding of spaces to learn. So some of the constraints on the ability to serve students in the program is that there's actually not enough facility space to serve students in the program. And we are hoping to see this addressed in the passage of a capital budget this year. Also, we would like to see a restoration of the Early Achievers funding, which provides professional development for providers to implement high-quality early learning programming. All right, in K-12 funding, building on the progress that was made last year, we are working on ways that the state can better monitor the new investments that have been made by the state in K-12 education, and this will include increasing public access to data, as well as just transparency on how districts are spending money and distributing those funds to schools. Some of this was addressed in 2242, and we hope to build on some of that work. Also ensuring that the targeted investments that were made in 2242 are equitable and adequate. So there was an increase in special education funding, and making sure that we would like to make sure that that is an adequate increase in special education funding, particularly given the new spending structure that districts will be subject to, as well as making sure that the increase in the LAP program and the high poverty concentration factor is distributed in the intended way. There is some concern with the 50% cutoff that some schools will flip for receiving the high poverty factor 1 year and not the next year, or vice versa. So making sure that that is implemented in a way that best serves students. The other issue in K-12 funding that we are hoping to address in the next session is fairness in access to local levy funds. In 2242, if you are a district that receives local effort assistance funding, you are capped at $1,500 per student. If you are in local funds plus the state local effort assistance, if you are a district that does not receive local effort assistance from the state, you are capped at $2,500 per student. So it already creates a two-tiered system in our state. Our priority around expanded learning opportunities is to continue the expansion of the Expanded Learning Opportunity Quality Initiatives. This program helps provide professional development for expanded learning opportunity providers to ensure that they have high quality programming, as well as the development of a quality indicator system. This expansion would allow, I believe, almost 3 times as many programs to be included in this initiative, and almost 7 times as many students to be served by these higher quality programs. Our next area of legislative priorities is in student supports. So we would like to see an investment in training for all school staff, and that this training would address trauma-informed practices, social-emotional learning, and other strategies for supporting students and intervening in behaviors. We would also like to see an increase in access to mental health services for students in school, and an increased access to support staff and community services. So making sure that the needs of the whole child are met, so including nurses, social workers, psychologists, as well as connecting schools and districts with community providers that can provide these services in schools. In career-connected learning, we would like to increase access to programs that help students to embark upon their career path. So this includes expanding access to dual credit programs and career and technical education programs, as well as work-based learning, and really trying to identify what the barriers are to students accessing these programs and addressing those barriers through policy. We would also like to see an increase in counseling and mentoring. With the move of the high school and beyond plan from just high school to beginning in middle school, there is a need for increased counselors in middle school, as well as just intentional implementation and support for districts in implementing a more robust high school and beyond plan. And in post-secondary, increasing access to post-secondary via the state need grant, as well as ensuring that all undocumented students in Washington state have access to financial aid programs, both through the state need grant and through the College Bound program. Before we get to questions, a couple of other conversations that are likely to come up. In regards to K-12 funding, we believe that discussions around the regionalization factor and the structure of that factor and how it is driving funds out to districts will be part of the legislative discussion this year, as well as staff mix and what the removal of staff mix from our funding formula means for districts. Funding for K-12 facilities is likely to come back, as well as discussion of high school assessments and its role in graduation requirements. All right, and with that, we are done a little bit early, and we are open for questions.
Thank you, Julia. We have about 15 minutes for questions. Folks who are listening, please type your questions into the Q&A feature on the bottom of the screen. And I just want to remind you, no question is too basic. There was there's a lot here. Education funding is a huge question, so I'm sure we've said things that people are not understanding. So here's the first question. What can we realistically expect from the 2018 session? If the Supreme Court has told the legislature to find another $1 billion to satisfy the McCleary school funding case, will anything else get done? That is pretty much the big question.
That is pretty much
the
big question. And I wish that I had a crystal ball. So for folks on the phone who might not be familiar, House Bill 2242 was the legislature's solution to the McCleary court case, where the Supreme Court has told the state legislature that it is not doing its job and fulfilling its paramount duty to fully fund K-12 education in the state. What the Supreme Court has said is that the structure of the funding system that the legislature put into place with House Bill 2242 will satisfy the court. However, the implementation timeline does not meet the requirements of the court. So the court has ordered that the legislature speed up the implementation, and rather than enhancing staff salaries by half next year and then half the following year, that the full enhancement for staff salary be given in the 2018 school year. This comes out to about an extra $1 billion that the state legislature has to come up with this year. It is an excellent question what we can realistically expect to get done. I think that there is both pressure and fatigue in the legislature. So there is pressure from the court and from the voters to meet their mandate. We also have a new political landscape where we have Democrats in control of both the Senate and the House. However, the sources where legislators could realistically come up with that sum of money are a little unclear. And I think that there is some fatigue among the legislators and a desire to move on to some other issues as well. So it will be interesting to see where the conversation falls. I think we may see some investment. I don't know if we will see the full billion and where the other political conversations will lie in that.
Remember to type in your questions. We've got another one coming in, but we can field a whole lot more right now. Can you elaborate on issues you anticipate with regard to regionalization of levy funds?
Yes, so two separate issues here. So the regionalization factor was put into place in regards to teacher salaries. So previously, teacher salaries were allocated to school districts via something called staff mix, which took into consideration the years of experience and the degrees that teachers held in a district, and they would average those years of experience and come up with a multiplier for staff salary. So each district got a different amount for staff salary. What the legislature has done in 2242 was to remove staff mix and give every district the same average staff salary, which is around $64,000. Districts can then pay their teachers different amounts, but that is the average amount that they are getting from the state. The state then layered on top of that a regionalization factor. And this factor takes into account the cost of housing in a school district and is intended to account for teaching in a district that has a higher cost of living. Most of the districts that receive a bump in salary due to this regionalization factor are in the Puget Sound area. There's a couple of districts on the eastern side of the state that receive it. But there are some concerns with the structure of it as well, where you have neighboring districts, one which is receiving a high regionalization factor and others which are receiving a low or zero regionalization factor. So we anticipate that districts will be discussing this with legislators in the coming session to see if there's a way to kind of smooth it out. Other concerns with this are that teachers do not always live in the district in which they teach, but they will be getting paid based on the cost of living of where they teach and not where they currently live. And then in terms of the issues we anticipate with the levy funds, so one issue is the one that we outlined, which is that that disparity between districts that require assistance from the state and receive the local effort assistance from the state and those that do not. And another issue is just clarity around what local levy funds can be spent on. The legislature said that local levy funds can only be spent on enrichment, and districts are seeking clarity on what that enrichment really means.
Thank you, Julia. Another follow-up question to the local levies is, why did the legislature create two different caps, 1,500 and 2,500?
That is a really good question, and having not been in the room in the 11th hour, I can't speak to the intention. My guess would be that there is a pretty substantial cost associated with providing local effort assistance to districts to get them up to that $2,500 per student cap. So if I were a betting woman, I would wager that that was a major consideration.
Thank you. So the expanded learning opportunities, ELO, how does the quality initiative actually increase the program and the number of students who get to participate?
So the initiative, if it is expanded, will increase the number of programs that can participate in the initiative and receive the training and the professional development to improve program quality. And the more programs that can participate in that means the more students and youth that actually get access to those high quality programs.
Thank you. So we have a question here on the moving of the test from 11th grade down to 10th grade. How does that impact schools and students this year when students who are in 11th grade didn't take the test? In other words, they were 10th graders last year, and now they're in 11th grade, and the test has been moved to the 10th grade.
I would have to get back to you on that question in terms of what the implementation timeline is on moving the test down to 10th grade.
Yeah, maybe it's not happening this year. Thank you. Is the LEV aware that with the limit on levies at $1.50 per thousand of property value, districts like mine, Davenport, will actually receive less overall funding due to a loss of over $600,000 in local levy funds beginning in 2019. Yes, we will get more state funding, but the overall amount of funding per pupil will decline. Does LEV realize that the elimination of staff mix and SAM, I'm not sure what that is, salary allocation model, will create more inequities?
So we are aware of the issue where some districts will receive less funding, particularly in the next school year, according to some estimates. And we have heard concerns that after the full implementation, there will also be a decline. And so that is something that we are looking into and exploring, and what are the levers that are causing that to happen, and what may be the changes that could address those issues. Let's see, what is the next part of the question?
And in the meantime, any districts out there who'd like to talk to us,
yes,
Julia would really like to talk to district staffers around their levy concerns. So Davenport, we would love to talk to you. And if there's anybody else out there, we would love to talk to you, because we're trying to get our head around it. We are getting our head around it, and we're seeing the repercussions of a lot of this work. But the more we understand it, the better we can advocate.
Yeah. Yeah. And just to add on to that, you know, I think that with any piece of legislation and any major system change like this, there are going to be some unintended consequences. This is almost certainly one of them. And so part of our work in this next legislative session is to address those unintended consequences before things are implemented and before there is harm caused to districts and students.
So this is going to be a tough question, I think. What will happen after the capital budget is passed? Broader question.
Yes. I'm in terms of what are the next steps, or if the person who submitted the question could provide a little more clarity.
So why don't we pause on that one right now, and I'm going to switch us to another question, and that is the Think High School and Beyond plan. What was the reasoning of the legislature in moving it to from high school down to include middle school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is actually a conversation that has been happening for quite a while in the state agency realm. So OSPI and the State Board of Education have been discussing best practices on implementing, as well as districts, best practices on implementing the high school and beyond plan. And one of those best practices that have been really effective in districts has been to start the conversation with students earlier than high school, so that when a student enters into high school, they have a better sense of what the career opportunities are, what their pathway is going to look like through high school, so they can really hit the ground running in 9th grade and take advantage of the courses available to them in high school, rather than using that 9th grade or 10th grade year as kind of a planning year. So this was really to help start the conversation earlier, to make sure that students could avail themselves of every possible opportunity in high school.
I have one more question coming in. This is going to be our final question. How will passage of the capital budget impact education across the state, and what are next steps?
Okay. Thank you. So passage of the capital budget, included in the capital budget this year, or what we think will be included in the capital budget this year, would be an increase in funding for early learning facilities. So there is the educational impact there. There is also discussion of where funding would come from for K-12 facilities, for class size reduction and the implementation of all-day kindergarten. So the impact across the state would potentially be new facilities for programs, particularly in the early learning and K through 3 space. And in terms of next steps, that's a good question. I think some of the facilities programs for education facilities are run through grant programs. So there would be, application processes for districts to go through, for early learning providers to go through, and for K-12 facilities, at least, there is a matching requirement if you are to qualify for the construction grant, and so districts would need to pass a bond or have a bond recently passed.
I also suspect there's going to be a lot more discussion about simple majority for bonds. Even though it's rough, the discussions need to start. Thank you, Julia. That wraps up today's LEVinar. Our next LEVinar will be more focused on a specific item within the legislative session, Topic, date, and time is still to be determined. You will receive an email from us. Thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions or comments, please send them to kelly@educationvoters.org. That's Kelly. And if you would like to talk to Julia because of district, you can give some feedback to us around district's impact from the education bill, funding bill. Please contact Julia, Julia, @educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. Thank you again for attending, and we hope you join us in the future.